It is 6:01 p.m. on April 4th, 1968. Martin Luther King Jr. steps onto the second-floor balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, room 306, where he always stayed. He leans over the railing to speak to musician Ben Branch in the parking lot below. The last words anyone records him saying are a request. He asks Branch to play Precious Lord, Take My Hand, at a rally that evening. Then a single rifle shot cracks the evening air, and everything that comes after is still being argued over. 57 years later, King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital and pronounced dead at 7:05 p.m. He was 39 years old. Within hours, cities across America were burning. More than 40 people died in the unrest. Over 100 cities saw violence. And the man already charged with the killing was an escaped convict from Missouri State Penitentiary, on the run, heading for London.
In 1999, 31 years after the assassination, a Memphis jury returned a unanimous verdict. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed as the result of a conspiracy. The King family had sued a local restaurant owner named Lloyd Jowers for wrongful death, and 12 jurors sided with them after barely 1 hour of deliberation.
1 hour. That is faster than my family decides where to order pizza.
And yet the United States Department of Justice looked at those exact same claims, ran their own investigation, and concluded the opposite. No conspiracy, no government involvement, and specifically flagged the civil trial as, quote, a deeply flawed, essentially uncontested proceeding. Two official bodies, completely opposite conclusions.
The reason the DOJ called it uncontested is significant. In that civil trial, the defense put up almost no challenge to the plaintiff's evidence. Pepper called 70 witnesses and the other side barely cross-examined. A unanimous verdict in a case where nobody argues back doesn't tell you much about the truth.
So the King family won a conspiracy verdict against a guy who didn't really fight back, and the DOJ said it basically proves nothing. That's less a legal victory and more a very expensive thought experiment.
And here is where this case gets genuinely hard to dismiss. Not because of Jowers, but because of what the FBI was probably doing to King while he was alive. The agency was running a program called COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, that targeted King specifically. An internal FBI memo from 1964 described him as, and this is a direct quote from the document, the most dangerous Negro in America.
And that same agency, the one that surveilled him, tapped his phones, bugged his hotel rooms, and sent him what historians read as an anonymous letter urging him to kill himself, was also the primary investigative body when he was murdered. That conflict of interest is not theoretical. It is structural.
The FBI's internal review of the FBI's murder investigation of the man, the FBI was trying to destroy. What could go wrong?
So let's talk about the man charged with the killing. James Earl Ray was 40 years old at the time of the assassination, an escaped convict who had broken out of Missouri State Penitentiary in April 1967, a full year before the shooting. When police finally caught him, it was June 8, 1960, 64 days after King died, at London's Heathrow Airport.
He made it to London on a fake passport, while being the most wanted man in America. That's either incredibly competent or incredibly lucky, and I don't know which is worse.
Walk me through the passport situation, because that detail matters. What name was he traveling under?
Eric Starvo Galt, a false Canadian passport. He had traveled through Portugal first, and according to investigators, was trying to reach an African country that had no extradition treaty with the United States. He had a plan. It wasn't a random flight, he had a specific destination strategy.
And this is a man who was, on paper, a broke escaped convict with no resources. Well, come back to how he funded all of this, because it's one of the questions nobody has fully answered.
On March 10, 1969, Ray pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. 3 days later, he recanted. He claimed his attorney Percy Foreman had pressured him into the plea, that he had been told a guilty plea was the only way to avoid the electric chair.
He pleaded guilty on a Monday and took it back by Thursday. That is a turnaround time usually reserved for impulse purchases.
To be fair, and I don't say that often about someone in this position, Percy Foreman was a famous defense attorney known for convincing clients to take deals. The claim that he pressured Ray isn't inherently implausible. What happened when Ray actually tried to fight the plea in court?
In October 1974, Ray formally attempted to withdraw the guilty plea. The court rejected it, and then in 1977, in a television interview, he told his most durable story that a man he knew only as Raleigh had directed his movements in the weeks before the shooting. Raleigh, he said, was the one who actually set him up.
Raleigh, classic. Every conspiracy needs a guy named Raleigh.
And he never gave investigators a consistent physical description of this Raleigh across the years he was telling the story. That inconsistency is going to matter when we get to what the investigators actually found.
Now, here is where we have to steelman the conspiracy case seriously, because it earns serious engagement. The FBI's institutional hostility toward King didn't start in 1968. COINTELPRO had been targeting him since at least 1963. The 1964 internal memo we mentioned. The most dangerous Negro in America, that wasn't a passing comment. That was the FBI's operational framing for one of its own citizens.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm tracking. This is the same FBI that was supposed to be impartially investigating his murder?
The very same, and it gets more specific than the memo. In November 1964, the FBI sent King an anonymous package. Inside was a tape recording, apparently of an extramarital encounter, along with a letter. Historians who have studied it, including those who reviewed it for the Church Committee, read the letter as suggesting King should take his own life before the recording became public. The FBI mailed a sitting civil rights leader what amounted to a suicide note and told him to sign it.
That is not a theory. The anonymous package is a documented historical fact, confirmed in the 1975 Senate Church Committee hearings. Senate investigators saw the files.
The FBI sent Martin Luther King a suicide letter. That sentence should end every debate about whether the FBI had it out for the man.
And the COINTELPRO operation extended well beyond that package. Phone taps, bugs installed in hotel rooms where King stayed, forged letters sent to civil rights organizations under King's name to sow internal discord, sustained pressure on journalists to publish negative stories. J. Edgar Hoover ran all of this personally. His contempt for King was not bureaucratic, it was visceral and documented. All of it confirmed in the Church Committee record, 1975 to 1976.
And the Church Committee, just so viewers are clear, was a Senate Select Committee. Formal congressional investigation. These findings are in the public record, not someone's self-published book.
Which is exactly why the question of motive has always been alive in this case. By April 1968, King was no longer only a threat to Southern segregationists. He had pivoted. He was in Memphis supporting a sanitation workers' strike. African American city workers striking for basic labor rights. And he was simultaneously organizing something called the Poor People's Campaign, a multiracial anti-poverty march on Washington that was explicitly anti-Vietnam War.
So he went from being a threat to the South to being a threat to the economy and the war. That is a significant upgrade in enemies.
And that's the core of William Pepper's argument. Who was Pepper exactly? Because his name is going to come up a lot.
William F. Pepper was the attorney who represented Ray from the 1980s until Ray died in 1998. He then represented the King family in the 1999 civil suit against Jowers. He died in April 2024 at age 86. Pepper argued in his books, Orders to Kill in 1995 and The Plot to Kill King in 2016, that King's shift toward economic justice and anti-war organizing made him a target at the highest levels of the U.S. military and intelligence establishment. Not just among racial extremists. That is the Steelman. King became dangerous to a much larger set of powerful interests, precisely when he was killed.
The timing does sit there and stare at you. He broadened his target list of enemies, and 3 months later he was dead. I'm not saying that proves anything. I'm saying I notice it.
Morgan's right that we should hold that thought, because what the physical evidence at the scene actually shows is where the conspiracy case either holds or collapses.
The House Select Committee on Assassinations spent 3 years, 1976 to 1979, investigating both the King and Kennedy killings. Their final report landed in two directions at once. Ray fired the shot, yes. But the committee also found what they called circumstantial evidence of a conspiracy. They were not able to say Ray acted completely alone.
And they got specific about the conspiracy angle. It wasn't just a vague suspicion. What exactly did they point to?
a St. Louis-based network of white supremacists who had allegedly placed a bounty on King's life. The committee believed the bounty existed. They could not directly connect Ray to the people offering it, could not prove he knew about it or was responding to it. But they put that finding in the official record anyway.
So the government's own investigators said, in an official report, we think someone put a price on his head, and we just can't prove who collected it. That's not nothing.
It's genuinely not. The HSCA conclusion is important because it's the honest middle ground that gets lost when people argue this case. Not lone gunman, case closed, and not government assassination. It's he fired the shot, and we don't know everything about why.
So let's look at what the physical evidence actually gives us because it's more specific than most people realize. Shelby County investigators recovered a Remington Game Master rifle, model 760, caliber .30-06, with Ray's fingerprints on it. It was not hidden. It was dropped in a bundle on the sidewalk outside a place called Canops Amusement Company on South Main Street, about 200 feet from the rooming house.
He dropped the murder weapon 200 feet away, in front of a business. That is not a getaway. That's a receipt.
What else was in this bundle? Because the contents matter.
Binoculars Ray had purchased, which places him doing surveillance of the motel, a beer can, and his prison radio. A radio he had owned since his time at Missouri State Penitentiary. So the bundle links him to the scene, to premeditation through the binoculars, and to his identity through the radio. That's a forensic trifecta.
And Ray's fingerprints were on the rifle itself, confirmed by Shelby County Forensics at the time, and not contested in any of the subsequent investigations.
Correct. That part of the chain has never been seriously broken. Room 5B at Bessie Brewer's boarding house also had a direct sightline to the Lorraine Motel balcony from the second-floor bathroom window. The trajectory lined up. Ray had rented that specific room that afternoon.
He rented the one room in the building with the shot. Okay, I keep coming back to the idea that this was either planned to a disturbing degree or the world's most incriminating coincidence.
Here is where I want to push back on the tidy version of events, though. Because the physical evidence points to Ray, but the location of the actual shot is genuinely disputed. Walk me through the brushy embankment argument.
Pepper and others argued the shot did not come from the bathroom window in room 5B but from a brushy embankment, a wooded area between the back of the rooming house and the Lorraine Motel. And this is not purely theoretical. Two witnesses placed a figure in or near those bushes immediately after the shot. Memphis police officer Vernon Dollahite was one, Solomon Jones, King's personal driver, who was in the motel parking lot, was the other. Both said they saw someone running from that brushy area right after the sound.
King's own driver looked up after the shot and saw somebody running from the bushes. That's not a conspiracy pamphlet. That's a witness.
Two witnesses, both with direct sightlines. That's not nothing. Though I want to flag. Jones and Dollahite said they saw a figure fleeing, not a shooter firing. There is a gap between person running from bushes and person who fired the rifle. Those are two different claims.
That distinction matters, and the HSCA took it seriously. They did not dismiss the eyewitness accounts, they noted them. But their conclusion was still that the shot came from the bathroom at 5B, based on the ballistic trajectory analysis they ran. The eyewitnesses saw someone who may have been fleeing the scene for other reasons, or may have been a second party. Neither investigation could say definitively.
Which is exactly the kind of evidentiary gap that a conspiracy theory lives in. Not fabricated, genuinely unresolved.
Now Lloyd Jowers. This is the figure at the center of the 1999 civil trial. Jowers owned Jim's Grill, a restaurant on the ground floor directly beneath Bessie Brewer's rooming house. In 1993, he went on ABC's Primetime Live and made a remarkable set of claims. That he had been paid $100,000 to arrange the assassination, that he had received the actual rifle from a Memphis produce dealer named Frank Liberto, and that a Memphis police officer, not Ray, had fired the fatal shot from that brushy embankment.
He went on national television and said he personally arranged a murder. In 1993, 25 years after the fact. I have questions about the legal strategy there.
He didn't face criminal prosecution because the statute of limitations on conspiracy had run out by then. And critically, his story did not stay consistent. How badly did Jowers contradict himself across his various statements?
Substantially. He changed the identity of the police officer he was implicating. He gave different accounts of where the rifle came from. At one point, he said Liberto had delivered the weapon to the restaurant. At another point, the story shifted in material ways. And Frank Liberto, the produce dealer, the one person who could have corroborated or refuted the rifle claim, had died before investigators could question him.
The key witness is dead. Of course he is. That's like the conspiracy theory equivalent of the dog eating the homework.
And the DOJ's reinvestigation was not cursory. They spent 2 years on this, 1998 to 2000, specifically because of the 1999 civil trial and its aftermath.
Their conclusion was unambiguous. Jowers was not credible. The DOJ found no reliable evidence that anyone other than Ray planned, ordered, or carried out the assassination. They documented every specific claim Jowers made and traced what could be traced, the produce. Dealer allegation died with Liberto. The police officer identification was never corroborated. And the changing story, the DOJ, noted this was a pattern across Jowers' various statements, not a series of clarifications.
So the 1999 civil verdict endorsed Jowers' version. The DOJ's formal legal investigation, with subpoena power and professional investigators, rejected it. Those are not equivalent authorities, and that distinction is important to hold.
Now, the civil trial itself. King v. Jowers ran 4 weeks in Memphis in late 1999. Pepper called 70 witnesses. Jowers did not take the stand. His prior statements were entered into evidence instead. And the jury, 6 black residents and 6 white residents, came back unanimous for the King family after roughly 1 hour. Damages $100 a token.
And that's the number that should stop everyone cold, $100. The King family was not suing for money. They wanted a legal finding, but here is what the DOJ specifically documented about that proceeding. The defense put up almost no meaningful challenge. Pepper called 70 witnesses and the other side essentially let them walk through unchallenged. A unanimous verdict in an uncontested trial is not the same thing as a finding of fact.
So it's less the jury weighed the evidence and decided, and more one side showed up and the other side didn't.
That is the DOJ's characterization, yes. And it matters because people cite the 1999 verdict as though it's equivalent to a criminal conviction or a full adversarial proceeding. It was neither. The civil standard is lower, preponderance of the evidence, and when the defense doesn't contest, even weaker claims can clear that bar.
Okay, but genuine question, why didn't the defense fight back? Who is even defending Jowers in that trial?
That is actually a fair point. The defense representation was minimal by design. Essentially, Jowers was elderly and in failing health by 1999. His side of the courtroom was not exactly marshaling resources, which is part of why the DOJ said the verdict tells us very little.
Now, Ray's Raw story. This is the other major pillar of the conspiracy case, and it has a specific investigative history. Ray first publicly named a handler called Rawl in his 1977 interview. Both the House Select Committee on Assassinations, in 1978, and the DOJ. Reinvestigation in 1998 through 2000 specifically chased this claim. Neither found any evidence that anyone named Rawl existed.
And Ray's physical descriptions of this Rawl changed. Not in minor ways across different interviews and statements. The descriptions were inconsistent enough that investigators noted as a pattern. Height, hair, build. None of it stayed fixed.
You know, if I were making up a guy who made me do a murder, I feel like I would at least keep his hair color straight.
And Pepper specifically pursued one lead. He identified a Portuguese-American man named Raul Colho living in New England, and argued this was Ray's handler. The DOJ investigated Raul Colho directly, tracked him, interviewed people around him, reviewed what they could verify about his movements. They found no connection to the assassination. That specific lead, which was the most concrete version of the Rawl story ever put forward, went nowhere.
So the Rawl claim went through 2 separate investigations spanning more than 2 decades, and the most specific name Pepper ever attached to it was cleared. That doesn't mean Ray was lying. People can misremember or misdescribe. But it does mean the story has zero evidentiary support after exhaustive review.
Here is where things get genuinely complicated, though. The FBI's conflict of interest is not just a matter of bad optics. It has evidentiary consequences. The HSCA went looking specifically for whether any FBI personnel took intentional steps to facilitate King's assassination. Their conclusion, no evidence they did, but in the same section of the report they acknowledged something significant. Relevant FBI files had been destroyed or withheld. A complete accounting was, by their own admission, impossible.
That phrase in the HSCA report is load-bearing. A complete accounting is impossible. That is a congressional investigative body acknowledging that they could not fully audit the FBI's role because the FBI did not preserve or provide all the relevant records. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's what the report says.
The FBI investigated its own role in the murder of the man it was trying to destroy, and some of the files were missing. I want to be very clear that I am not surprised by that.
And the COINTELPRO language the committee used, created a climate of hostility, is deliberate and careful. The HSCA was not willing to accuse the FBI of ordering or arranging the killing. But they were not willing to say the FBI's decade of institutional warfare against King was irrelevant to the context of his murder. Those are two different things, and the report holds both.
Morgan, you look like you want to say something about the July 2025 files.
I do. In July 2025, the Trump administration declassified a new batch of FBI records related to King. The King Center and the King family actively opposed the release. Their concern was not that the files would expose a cover-up. It was about privacy, about King's personal life being laid open without consent.
And what the files actually contained, based on reviews by historians and members of Congress in the weeks after release, was additional COINTELPRO surveillance material. More documentation of the illegal harassment program. Not new evidence connecting the FBI to the assassination itself. Significant for understanding the scope of what the FBI was doing to King. Not a smoking gun on the killing.
So the big 2025 declassification proved the FBI was doing more illegal stuff to King, which everyone already kind of assumed, but did not prove they killed him. That's a lot of anticipation for a "we were bad in ways we already admitted."
Which is actually going to matter for the zoom out section, because the way people received those files tells you something important about how this story functions in public memory. But hold that thought, because Ray himself is the last piece of the investigation that needs to land.
Ray died on April 23, 1998, hepatitis C complications in prison, without ever getting the trial he spent 24 years fighting for. From 1974 until the day he died, he was actively trying to withdraw his guilty plea and get in front of a jury. He testified before the HSCA in 1978 and told them he did not kill King. The King family, by the end, supported his push for a trial, not because they believed he was innocent, but because they thought he deserved an adversarial hearing.
The King family supporting Ray's request for a trial is one of the most genuinely strange facts in this entire case. They believed he was part of a larger conspiracy. Not that he was innocent, but that a real trial might surface information a guilty plea had buried.
That's a remarkable position. We think you helped kill our father, but you deserve your day in court more than the government deserves to keep its secrets. That is a level of principle I respect, and also find deeply uncomfortable.
And on the other side of Ray's ledger, the reason serious investigators have always struggled with his raw story is that Ray never once gave a coherent, consistent account of what he was actually doing in Memphis on April 4, 1968. If he wasn't shooting King, not once. Every alternative he offered had gaps, contradictions, or no supporting witnesses. You can argue he was a patsy, but a patsy who was physically present still needs to account for where he was. Ray never could.
That's the wall the conspiracy case keeps hitting. The FBI's behavior was real and documented and damning. The questions about Ray's funding and travel are real and unresolved. But the specific alternative account of who else pulled the trigger, and exactly how, that part has never cohered across 30 years of investigation by people who were actively trying to prove it.
If you think that gap is uncomfortable, wait until you hear what the verdict section does with it.
William Pepper spent 4 decades building the case that the assassination was coordinated across multiple institutions simultaneously. Not just Ray, not just a bounty, but elements of the U.S. military, the Memphis Police Department, and organized crime acting in concert. He put this in 2 books, Orders to Kill in 1995 and The Plot to Kill King in 2016. He claimed to have located witnesses who saw military intelligence operatives on the ground in Memphis on April 4, 1968. He died in April 2024 at age 86, still arguing the case.
And the military intelligence operatives claim, how specific did Pepper get? Did he name units, name individuals?
He named witnesses who said they saw such individuals. The problem is that none of those named witnesses were independently corroborated by the HSCA, by the DOJ, or by independent historians who reviewed his sourcing. Pepper's witnesses existed, he was not fabricating people, but their accounts did not hold up to cross-examination by investigators who were not working from Pepper's own framework.
So he had witnesses, and the witnesses had stories, and nobody else could verify the stories. That is the conspiracy research equivalent of a friend saw it happen.
To be fair to Pepper, and I want to be precise here, the absence of corroboration is not the same as proof of fabrication. He was working on a case where he believed the very institutions capable of corroboration had reason to suppress. That's an unfalsifiable position, which is exactly the problem. Every failed lead becomes evidence of how deep the cover goes.
Right. And at some point, the theory that explains every piece of missing evidence is a theory that can never be wrong, which means it can never really be tested either.
All right, let's put the pieces on the table and call them what they are. Some things in this case are confirmed. Some things are genuinely speculated. And the difference matters because this case has been discussed for 57 years in ways that blur that line badly.
Starting with what is confirmed and not seriously disputed by anyone working from primary sources. James Earl Ray shot Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4, 1968. The rifle with his fingerprints. Room 5B with the direct sightline. His bundle dropped 200 feet away containing his own prison radio. His flight from the scene across 2 continents on a false passport. The HSCA in 1979 reached this conclusion. The DOJ in 2000 reached it independently. That finding has not been broken.
The man left his prison radio at the crime scene. I want to flag that one more time. His prison radio.
Confirmed. Nobody disputes that. The next confirmed fact is the FBI's COINTELPRO operation against King, and I want to be very specific here because it deserves precision. Wiretaps, hotel bugs, forged correspondence sent to civil rights organizations under King's name, and the 1964 anonymous package with the tape recording and the letter historians read as a suicide suggestion. Every element of this is documented in the public record, confirmed by Senate investigators in the Church Committee hearings of 1975 and 1976, and not contested by any serious historian anywhere on the political spectrum.
The significance of that confirmation is that the FBI's motive and documented hostility are not in question. The only question is whether that hostility translated into operational involvement in the killing itself. And that is where the evidence does not follow.
So did the FBI hate him and try to destroy him question? Confirmed. Yes, absolutely. Did the FBI pull the trigger or pay someone to question? That's a different question with a different answer. Those two things live at different addresses and people keep sending mail to the wrong one.
Exactly right. Third confirmed item, and this one is important because it gets lost in the binary debate. The HSCA found circumstantial evidence of a conspiracy and specifically believed a white supremacist network in St. Louis had offered a bounty on King's life. They could not connect Ray to the bounty. They could not prove he knew it existed or was responding to it. But they put that finding in an official congressional report in 1979. That is not a fringe allegation. It is an official acknowledgement that Ray may not have been acting in complete isolation.
Congress said, officially, there was probably a bounty and we can't prove he knew about it. That sentence should be in every summary of this case, and it almost never is.
Now to the speculated column. Lloyd Jowers. The claim that he was paid $100,000 to arrange the assassination, that a Memphis police officer fired the actual shot from the brushy embankment, that he received the rifle from a produce dealer named Frank Liberto.
Speculated and specifically not credible based on the formal DOJ investigation. Jowers contradicted himself across his various statements in material ways. The produce dealer who could have confirmed or denied the rifle claim was dead before investigators reached him. The DOJ spent 2 years tracing every specific allegation and found no reliable evidence supporting any of it. And the 1999 civil verdict, which people cite as though it vindicates Jowers, was reached in a proceeding the DOJ formally characterized as essentially uncontested. The other side did not mount a real defense.
Morgan, how do you feel about the fact that the civil trial was basically one lawyer calling 70 witnesses to an empty room and then calling it a verdict?
I think the King family deserved better. They deserved a real adversarial proceeding that could have actually tested Pepper's theory. What they got was a legal finding that couldn't withstand DOJ scrutiny, because the evidentiary foundation was never stress-tested. That is not the family's fault. That is a structural failure of the proceeding.
Alex thinks the Jowers verdict is meaningless as evidence. I think it at least means someone cared enough to make a legal record. Morgan, who's right? Tell us in the comments, because I genuinely cannot read the room on this one.
Ray's raw story lands in the speculated column, and I want to be specific about why, because the investigation was not superficial. The HSK looked at it in 1978. The DOJ looked at it again between 1998 and 2000. Neither found any evidence that a handler named Rawl existed in any form.
And Pepper's most concrete version of the claim, the identification of Raul Coelho, a specific Portuguese-American man in New England, was run to ground by DOJ investigators. They found no connection between Coelho and the assassination. That was the most testable form the theory ever took, and it came back empty.
So the one time the Rawl story got specific enough to actually check, it was wrong. That's not absence of evidence. That's evidence that checked out as absent.
What I keep returning to is the motive question. If Ray invented Rawl, why? The most straightforward explanation is that a guilty plea to a capital crime, once entered, is almost impossible to withdraw, and a mysterious handler is exactly the kind of story that could plausibly justify getting a new trial. Ray had every incentive to construct that narrative after the fact.
I'm not saying he definitely made it up. I'm saying if you were trying to get out of a 99-year sentence and you needed a story, a mysterious man told me to be there, is a pretty good story to tell. That's just practical.
Now, the question that neither column fully resolves, and this is the part of the case that stays with me. How did Ray do it? He was a broke escaped convict. No education beyond a basic level. No documented income. No support network that investigators ever identified, and yet he traveled from the American South to Toronto, then through Mexico, then to Los Angeles, then to Atlanta, then to Memphis, then to Canada, then to Lisbon, then to London, all on a forged Canadian passport, over a period that stretches back before the assassination itself.
The HSCA raised this directly and could not answer it. The DOJ acknowledged it as an unresolved question in their 2000 report. Their conclusion was that petty crime and opportunistic theft remained plausible explanations. Ray had a prior history of small robberies, but they were candid that they could not document the specific funding chain.
Petty crime and opportunistic theft. That is the government's explanation for how a man funded a months-long international escape from a murder. They say he planned at some point. We don't know, but it was probably small robberies. Starts to feel like the theory that needs the most work.
And I want to be honest. I don't think the funding gap proves a conspiracy. I think it's genuinely possible a desperate man with nothing to lose found a way to move money that investigators couldn't trace 50 years later. But the DOJ, calling it unresolved while also calling it not requiring a conspiracy, is doing a lot of work simultaneously. Those two positions are in tension.
Morgan's right. We can't explain it, but we're sure it doesn't mean what you think it means. Is a position, but it's not a comfortable one.
Harry's what makes this case so genuinely difficult to sit with. You have two things that are both true and almost impossible to hold in the same frame. One, the US government was provably running an illegal campaign against one of its own citizens. Not marginal, not theoretical, but documented, confirmed by a Senate committee. And damning in its specifics. Two, there is no credible, independently verified evidence that this same government arranged or carried out the killing. The FBI's behavior gives the conspiracy theory its emotional validity even when the physical evidence trail doesn't follow.
It's like the FBI is standing at the scene of a crime, holding a grudge and a history of arson. Of course, people are going to point at them, even if someone else started this particular fire.
And that's the analytical trap. The documented wrongdoing creates a framework that makes the unproven wrongdoing feel inevitable. They were capable of it. Becomes they did it, and those are not the same inference, even when everything about the first thing is true.
Historian Gerald Posner wrote a book in 1998 called Killing the Dream, specifically examining this assassination. And his argument was that the persistence of the conspiracy theory reflects something profound about how we process loss at scale. When a figure of King's historical weight is killed, the mind resists the idea that one man with a rifle could simply end something that large. The magnitude of the loss demands a perpetrator commensurate with it. A racist drifter from Missouri doesn't satisfy that need. A government conspiracy does.
That's actually a real thing. I feel that the idea that a person who changed that much of American history just got shot by some guy feels wrong at the scale of it. Your brain wants the villain to match the hero.
Posner's point lands. But I also think it obscures something real about this specific case that gets dismissed too quickly when people make the lone drifter argument. The FBI was not a bystander. They were a participant in King's destruction, actively for years. The question of whether that institutional hatred crossed a specific operational line is unresolved, not answered.
If you want more of this, real evidence, real gaps, real arguments where we actually disagree, we're here every week. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one.
The King family's position is the one I find most clarifying because they are the people with the most at stake and the most reason to distrust the official record. And yet their position is not simple. They believed Ray was part of something larger. They supported his push for a trial. They sued Jowers and won a verdict. They have said, publicly and clearly, that they do not accept the conclusion that a lone gunman acted without support.
And yet every formal review, the HSCA, the DOJ, historians who have spent careers on this, says the civil verdict doesn't hold up and Jowers wasn't credible. The family's distrust of the FBI is completely earned by the historical record. Their specific legal conclusions are not. Both of those things are simultaneously true.
That's the thing about earned distrust. It's rational, it's justified by documented evidence, and it can still lead you to conclusions that the same evidence doesn't support. Trusting an institution to have done everything it was capable of doing is not the same as proving it did. The King family had every reason to look for more. That doesn't mean the more they were looking for was there to find.
The July 2025 declassification is actually the cleanest illustration of the cognitive trap this case sets. The files released additional COINTELPRO surveillance material. More scope, more documented harassment, more evidence of the FBI's institutional war against King. And that is genuinely significant for understanding what the Bureau was doing. But it is not the same category of evidence as assassination planning. More proof of one crime is not proof of a second crime.
But I get why people receive it that way. You open a box and find more evidence that the FBI was lying and surveilling and harassing. Your brain goes, so what else were they hiding? That's not irrational. That's pattern recognition.
It is pattern recognition. And it's also exactly how a true thing about documented wrongdoing gets used to validate a claim about a different wrongdoing that has not been documented. The 2025 files moved the needle on the FBI was surveilling King extensively. They did not move the needle on the FBI arranged his killing. Those are separate needles.
So for people who already believe it, the new files are confirmation. For people who don't, they're context. The files themselves don't change, only the framework you're reading them through changes. That's a wild feature of evidence when distrust is already baked in.
Which is precisely the evidentiary problem at the center of this case. Once institutional distrust reaches a certain threshold, and in the King family's case, that threshold is completely earned. Additional disclosure of any kind gets absorbed into the existing framework rather than evaluated on its own terms. That's not a character flaw. It's a consequence of being lied to systematically for years.
So here is the honest summary stated as plainly as we can. Ray almost certainly fired the shot. The rifle, the fingerprints, the sightline from room 5B, the binoculars, the prison radio, the 64-day flight on a forged passport. That chain of physical evidence has not been broken by any investigation that had access to the full record.
But whether anyone directed him, funded him, set the conditions for the killing, that remains genuinely open. 3 separate official investigations. The FBI in 1968, the HSCA from 1976 to 1979, the DOJ from 1998 to 2000, could not fully close those questions. And part of the reason they couldn't is that the FBI destroyed or withheld records from 1968 that no subsequent investigation was able to recover. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is what the official reports say about themselves.
An evidentiary gap created by the institution under investigation. That sentence alone is why this case will never fully close. Not because the conspiracy theory is right, but because the conditions for answering it cleanly were destroyed by the people who had the most reason to.
Next week, we are going somewhere very different, and somehow even stranger. A U.S. Navy destroyer allegedly turned invisible in 1943, teleported from Philadelphia to Norfolk, and came back with sailors reportedly fused into the hull. The Navy says it never happened. The entire story traces back to one man's handwritten annotations in the margins of a UFO book. We are going to find out exactly where the line falls between a classified naval experiment and a completely invented legend.
If this is the kind of evidence-first breakdown you want more of, real documents, real gaps, real arguments where we genuinely disagree, subscribe and hit the bell. We're here every week, and next week's story is one I promise you did not see coming from here.